For those of you joining, just hold on for a moment and we will get started momentarily. Maybe you should have said that, Terry. Sorry.
I'm not seeing anybody on yet. Are you on your end? Oh, there we go. I see him. For those of you that are joining, we're just going to sit and wait maybe another minute or two, and then we'll get going.
We might want to monitor that based upon how many participants we have too. We're at 65 right now.
So we're at 3 o'clock, so I think people are going to really start hopping on right now.
Okay, we're at 105. Terry, you might want to just introduce yourself as the host.
Well, now that you said that.
Okay.
I'll wait just a minute.
Okay.
I'm just so excited to see how many people are joining us. This is amazing. Really happy.
Can you see on your screen, Debbie?
I can.
Okay.
I'm just seeing them jump on, and it's very exciting to me.
Okay. So we're at 3:02, maybe another minute or two. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I wouldn't go too much longer. I'm sure people will continue to join as they get on. Looks like someone has a raised hand. Let me see if I see a.
Barbara Baxter.
Can see. Barbara could put her question in the chat session. If she, because this is a webinar, they are not able to speak directly to Debbie. They would have to write their questions to Dr. Gilmore, or Debbie, as she likes to be called.
Okay, I think that, I mean, it's 3 minutes after. I think if you guys are okay, I think we would be good to get going.
Yep.
All right, we would like to welcome all of you for this webinar featuring Dr. Debi Gilmore. We're especially grateful to have her. She is an excellent clinician. I say that just based off of knowing some of her training. Well, I'd like to just begin by telling you a little bit about her. Dr. Debi Gilmore is co-owner of the EFT Clinic and co-founder of Building a Lasting Connection, a relationship program for premarital and newly developed relationships. For those of you that don't know what EFT is, it stands for Emotionally Focused Therapy. I am a clinician myself, and I'm aware of this training that she has undergone, and I know that It is a hard and kind of challenging program and certification, and kind of the feeling in the therapy world is those who are EFT certified are some of the best therapists around. So we are indeed grateful to have Debi with us today. She works with couples, families, and individuals, those who struggle with challenges such as anxiety and depression, those that have relationship difficulties, people who are dealing with grief, betrayal, definitely a lot dealing with self-worth. She does a lot of work with self-worth, and as a clinician, she deals with all mental health issues primarily. She achieved her doctorate degree in marriage and family therapy with a special focus on clinical skills. She's involved with clinical supervision in business and leadership and a business program development. So with that, we're very happy to have you, Dr. Debi Gilmore, and we will turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the Tingies for their willingness to serve as hosts for this workshop. It's quite a sacrifice for them. But I also want to thank each of you for signing up for this presentation, because I recognize that you have a lot of options. There's a lot happening this week and especially today. So I'm grateful for your presence and for the spirit that you bring. And I want you to know that the process of pulling this presentation together has been an incredible experience for me. Almost every day I pled with the Lord to know what you needed to hear, and received strong impressions and promptings about what I was supposed to share with you. Specific things. I found myself feeling an urgency to write them down as they came to me so I wouldn't forget to share them. And not only that, I have received impressions about how I was supposed to teach you these principles. So I have been blessed. And it's my hope that you will leave this presentation with something useful, and maybe something that will improve your life, or something that will bring you hope and healing. And some of you might wonder, well, what makes me an expert in this topic? It's not just because of my profession or my credentials. We'll set those aside. Yes, I've spent years pouring through the research and with an intense interest in the idea of self-worth and self-criticism. And through that process, I've developed this step-by-step exercise, very practical steps that I will share with you today. However, even more important, I want you to know this, that I consider myself an expert because I have an inner critic too, very alive inner critic. And you can be confident that what I share with you today are principles that I've had to apply in my own life, in my quest to conquer my inner critic. You're not alone. That's what I wanted you to know. So it's a lifelong journey, and one that can be both challenging and rewarding. And through the years, as I have taught these principles to my clients, I have witnessed miraculous change. And I've watched numerous individuals shed heavy burdens that led them to find incredible peace and moments of joy. So I want to dive in and begin by sharing something that Elder Jeffrey R. Holland said in our most recent general conference. It's in his talk, you can find it, titled, "Not as the World Giveth." He was speaking about this very topic and about a concern for a fierce war that we are all facing today. He said, quote, "Fortunately, the current generation has not had a third world war to fight, nor have we experienced a global economic crash like the one in 1929, leading to a Great Depression. The Great Depression we now face has less to do with the external loss of our savings and more to do with the internal loss of our self-confidence," unquote. We all possess an inner critic, or what I like to say, the chatter in the back of our head. It's a negative internal commentary on who we are and how we behave. And sometimes that inner critic can be relentless. So here's a question that I want you to consider. And I'm going to have you, I hope you'll be interactive in that you will get out a notepad and a pen and answer some of these questions and do these exercises that I'm going to share with you right while I'm teaching you the principles. Here's the question. What does your inner critic tell you? Is it a theme? Or is it a specific thought process that's so familiar? Here's some statements I want you to try on for size. Do these sound familiar? Well, that was a dumb thing to say. Or I am so stupid. Or I should look like her. Or I will never succeed like him. And here's one that may be all too familiar. I am such a fool to think that I am lovable, or that I'm needed, or that I am valued. Now, the one that seems to resonate with so many is, I feel like such a fraud. Now, my profession, it's sometimes referred to as imposter syndrome. Interestingly, there was a poll, and I hope you found it, for those of you who participated in this informal survey that, by the way, was anonymous, but at least 50% of you reported having felt imposter syndrome at some point in your life. If you didn't get a chance to answer the poll, I hope you will go there and do so. It's, again, completely anonymous, and I will be sharing more of the results with you throughout this presentation. I'm certain that you will find the results fascinating and also affirming that you're not alone. So actually, research tells us that 70% of people suffer from imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. I hear this from people of all walks of life, no matter the gender, the level of education, their credentials. I hear it from professors and top executives. I hear it from physicians and great leaders, and those that we might assume have everything they could ever desire. They say things like, if others really knew me or got to know me better, they would see that I'm a fraud. Now, maybe this is somewhat familiar to you or similar to your internal experience. It just seems that no matter how accomplished or capable we may be, sometimes, if not often, we are haunted by an inner critical voice that consistently reminds us that we're not what we're all cracked up to be. In my practice, my clinical practice, I have sat across from individuals who've spent years being haunted by the agony of their inner critic, individuals who weep in my office and even struggle with believing that God is aware of them, that he cares about them. They tell me that they feel abandoned, maybe somewhat worthless, and some slip in discouragement and despair and even levels of depression. But to some degree, most of us are pretty aware of our own inner critical voice, and it's at different levels. Everyone's is different, but at certain points in our lives, the critic becomes louder and more annoying. Now, sometimes those thoughts are pretty normal. Here's some examples. Do you ever have a longing for a do-over? I do. Do you sometimes have thoughts that tell you that you should have done it differently, better, or more perfectly? Do you sometimes find yourself walking into a crowded room with weakened confidence? Or do you struggle to apply self-compassion? Have you ever heard of that term? Do you sometimes, here's one that's, I think everyone has experienced at some point. Do you sometimes struggle with an inability to accept compliments from others? Or do you experience discomfort when someone says something nice to you? All of those are very normal human experiences. Of course, we sometimes feel awkward and get those accompanying awkward feelings. But let me clarify what we're discussing today. This inner critical voice is a more self-critical, damaging thought process. The nature of the inner critic that we're talking about today is very interesting to me, which is why I felt compelled to study it and research it so intently. It's a very private, often painful dialogue that distracts us and can become a constant chatter that causes us to feel inadequate, maybe paralyzed at times, and overshadows our strengths and our gifts and our true self. Now, I say private internal dialogue because when you're with others, we have no idea what the other person is thinking or telling themselves. We may not be aware of their internal suffering, the suffering that our friends, loved ones, and acquaintances are experiencing. My hope and intent today is to emphasize that we are not alone in this struggle to conquer that critical voice. And I also want to emphasize that if we continue to buy into this internal script, it can seriously affect our view of ourselves, rob us of motivation, and damage our self-worth. I came across a quote from Dr. Eric Genazzo. He's a clinical psychologist, and he has written about this phenomenon. I want to share this with you. Some of it is a little humorous, some of it is a little too painful and familiar. He said, quote, "We yearn to be seen as successful, and we may present ourselves as though we have ascended that mountain of tranquility. And yet we alone know the secret truth. We are each, at times, a quivering, heaving, throbbing crockpot of insecurity. And we may believe erroneously that the smooth Instagram exteriority of others is a reflection of their inner confidence," unquote. Now, this next point I want to make is very important. It's going to show up again in my presentation, but basically, we all have a universal need to be seen as acceptable, capable, and lovable. However, today, I am suggesting something even more important, that we sometimes struggle to offer this compassionate attitude to ourselves. We sometimes struggle to accept ourselves, to see ourselves as capable, and to see ourselves as lovable. That I'm going to suggest, that ability to accept ourselves is the foundation of self-worth and our ability to have healthy relationships, not only with ourselves, but with others. So today, here's the map of what we're going to cover. We're going to explore 3 very important questions, and these questions will drive my presentation. Number 1, where does this inner critic come from? Number 2, how can we conquer this inner critical voice? And number 3, how damaging is this internal negative chatter if we continue to buy into it? So let's dive in. Question number 1. Where does this inner critic come from? It's very helpful to become aware of the beginnings of this inner critical voice. First, let's consider the influence of the world. Our world tends to be image-focused and health-obsessed. We are living in a world we tend to be conditioned to embrace the idea that our external self, what people see, must be refined and smooth, young and vibrant, successful, and overall suggesting a life of ease, right? So what we believe the world expects of us can and does contribute to our internal dialogue of self-criticism. Now, next, consider this. Unfortunately, painful events and traumatic experiences can fuel our inner critic. In the poll that I brought up earlier, for those of you who took the poll, this is so sad to hear that 100% of you that took the poll have suffered a painful loss or an event that robbed you of your self-confidence. I'm actually not surprised. I see this so often. At that point, we might feel confident and capable throughout our lives until something traumatic happens. And then often people will suddenly lose all confidence and the internal critical voice takes up residence. Insecurity can take hold, and exhaustion from the trauma, painful experience or loss of some kind robs us of being able to function with confidence and motivation. Now, I am a visual learner and I like to teach visually. So I'm going to share my screen. I have some PowerPoint slides that will give you an understanding of how this inner critic develops and where it comes from. So just bear with me while I share my screen. And if Brother and Sister Tingy will let me know if, can you see that? I see nods. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So notice that at the top, I'm suggesting that relationships shape our view of the world. Now, in that left circle, this is where we began. And I want to talk about this briefly. Our heavenly home. We find information about that in the family of proclamation to the world. If you go to the second paragraph, you will see that it refers to a heavenly father and a heavenly mother in the form of, it says, heavenly parents. And it also adds the word that we were beloved, that we are beloved by those heavenly parents. And in that existence, when we were there in that heavenly home, we had acceptance. We had a sense of belonging, and we had comfort, and it was safe to reach for those things. Then we were presented with an incredible plan, and we wanted to sign up for that because we knew that in order to become like our heavenly parents, we needed to come to an earthly home and grow and learn so that we could return better. So in that earthly home, we have relationships. And those relationships with our siblings, with our parents, with maybe extended family that comes into that environment, we learn about relationships and we learn about the world, and we are influenced about ourselves by those experiences. Then we grow and we expand on that, and we have relationships with others, friends, other family members, maybe teachers and doctors and professors and ward members and neighbors, you name it. We expand on that, and that all interacts with our view of our world and our view of ourselves. So all along, we are developing a relationship with ourselves based on our relationships with others. Ideally, we will also have a relationship with God that is reciprocal, so that we can continuously be reminded of where we came from and where we are headed. So all of that contributes to our view of ourselves and increases our self-worth. Ideally, we will have a foundation of a love for ourselves and for others in the world. But now we have the power of the adversary. We knew that was going to be. But interestingly, something I want to emphasize is the adversary directly attacks our relationship with ourselves, which directly impacts our view of ourselves. So I'm going to stop share because I want to bring you all back and so you can see our faces. And now I want to just continue with talking to you about Satan. We know that two of Satan's most powerful tools are self-doubt and distractions. Let me share with you something that President Nelson said. He said, quote, "Satan and his minions will constantly contrive roadblocks to prevent you from understanding the spiritual gifts with which you have been and can be blessed," unquote. So what I'm suggesting is that the adversary's attacks directly impact our self-worth. And let's talk about the emotional impact of the worldly or adversarial attacks, the emotional impact. The attacks reinforce our self-doubt, feeds into our inner critical voice, and we begin to compare ourselves to others. We might buy into perfectionism and rigidity or apathy and ambivalence. So if we get caught up in those emotions, we begin to feel shame and inadequacy. Let's now talk about the behavioral impact.
Excuse me, Debbie.
Yes.
There is a request for you to go back to the diagram. Someone was copying that down, or will they have that?
Thank you. I'm so glad the hosts are here.
No problem. And also, just so people know, we're trying to have the last 10 minutes for Q&A as well. And there are some very good comments coming in on the chat. So thank you. Beautiful poetry. So thank you for that. And we'll try to address some of these questions if we have time at the last 10 minutes of the hour.
Oh, and capture those. I want to see them. I'm sad that I'm so distracted by this presentation. So I will share my screen. I'm going to pull out briefly, but if this is helpful, I'm so glad. Just copy whatever you want and hopefully it's useful. But what I want to do now is move to question 2. How can we conquer our inner critical voice? How? And I'm going to give you practical step by step. So hopefully you're ready for me to advance to the next screen, because I want you to get out a piece of paper. And I want you to create 3 columns that look just like this. On that left column, I would like you to label it inner critic. Step 1 is to identify your inner critic. And what I mean by that is to identify not just the theme, but I want you to identify the exact script that your inner critic tells you. And you will begin to shape yours, and it might look something like this. But under that first column, I want you to identify specific thoughts that come automatically at times when you are self-critical. Today, you might identify a handful, but throughout this week or the next few weeks, I would like you to keep this in your pocket or your purse and pull it out when the thought comes. Write it down. Here's an example. I can't get anything right. Usually these are self-critical thoughts that are all or nothing, or absolutes, what I call absolutes. I will never be successful. This will help you become more aware of the specific critical thoughts that are so self-defeating and can cause you to feel hopeless. Now, I want you to approach this exercise with the intent to begin to see these thoughts as an alien point of view, separate. You may begin to uncover harsh, attacking, and judgmental statements. Now, I want you to consider something as you write these down. Notice how harsh they are. Now, I want you to imagine that a dear friend reaches out to you, maybe texts you or calls you, knocks on your door, and that dear friend asks to talk to you, to sit with you because they are suffering. They've come to you for counsel and comfort. Would you tell your friend these harsh, attacking, and judgmental things that your inner critic tells you? Of course not. Of course you wouldn't. So my question then becomes for you today, why are you so mean to yourself? Notice how hostile your internal enemy can be. Continue to fill out that column with as many statements as possible, whatever comes to mind. Now, I want you to be acutely aware of what your inner critic is telling you. It's important to begin to see this as separate from your true self. I want to suggest that your inner critic is not a reflection of truth. I will be right now so bold as to say that these statements are lies. They are lies about you, with the power to overshadow who you really are, and even overshadow gentle whisperings of the Spirit, which may cause you to feel abandoned by God. It's a viewpoint that you have adopted based on a variety of experiences and maybe attitudes that have been directed towards you that you have internalized. At certain points in our lives, we begin to buy into the negative script, and over time, they can dangerously become our truth. Now, I'm going to share with you the characteristics of our inner critic. Some of these may fit, some of them may not, but I want you to take a look at what I have found. The inner critic tends to have excessively high standards. The critic tends to have a fear of failure, and so therefore has to control the environment around the critic. Otherwise, failure is possible. The critic has a need for approval from others and possibly a negative view of others because past hurts. betrayals. The critic also has unidentified needs, may not even be aware of the needs, and because unclear boundaries. Okay, so here's what your column may end up looking like. Watch for the absolutes. They are there. You will find them. And the problem with absolutes is they cause us to feel hopeless. There's no room for hope. They're pretty firm and definitive. So now let's go to step 2. Step 2, notice in this second column, I want you to label that doubting self. What I'm suggesting here is that we have 3 selves, 3 parts to us. 2 of them are not welcome, but they took up residence. Now the doubting self, you'll see, has no lines underneath. Here's why. The doubting self does not have a voice. The doubting self just agrees. So here's what yours may look like. Let me just give you the characteristics of the doubting self first. The doubting self tends to be submissive. And if you think about it, yep, I agree, you're right, inner critic, that's pretty submissive. Also somewhat insecure, maybe lacking confidence. How about this? Placates to keep peace, compares self to others. And here's one, disowned needs. Maybe the doubting self, that part of you knows what the needs are, but has decided that the doubting self decides that it's not worthy of achieving those needs and longs for acceptance. So here's what your column may look like. Likely, yep, you're right. Okay. So, you know the principle of the second witness? Well, this is kind of a negative principle of the second witness. There's 2, the critic and the agreeable doubting self. So let's go to step 3. It's time to take a look at step 3. Okay, what I'm going to suggest is that your inner critic's lease is up. I like to say it that way because the inner critic is no longer welcome. It's time to evict. Now, one of the statements in the questionnaire I posted for you was, I wish I could have more respect for myself. I was surprised to see that 100% of you that participated in that poll agreed with that statement. I was surprised to see that you feel like you wish you could have more respect for yourself. Your inner critic took up residence long ago. It's now time to evict. Okay, so here's what you do. Notice there's a bold line separating the 2 columns on the left. I want you to get out a pair of scissors, and I would like you to cut off the left 2 columns. Now, this is once you have completed this exercise. So cut off those 2 left columns and label the 3rd column, deeper, wiser self. I can already hear you all right now. You're saying, wait, scissors are not enough. Now, this next step, evicting your inner critic, is difficult, but also extremely rewarding. And I'm not suggesting that scissors is enough. Step 3, rejecting and evicting your inner critic, requires you to make a very specific and clear decision. And maybe you're ready to do that right now. A commitment to yourself that once you make that decision, you're committing to yourself that you will not betray yourself by giving space to the inner critic. Remember, his lease is up. And same with the doubting self. This process, an emotional process, takes power away from your inner critic and allows your deeper, wiser self to emerge and take back power. So here's what the decision may sound like. I refuse to allow my inner critic to rob me of peace anymore. Now, you're still wondering, how do I do that? The best way to evict your inner critic is to move to step 4. Now, I'm going to...
Debbie?
Yes.
What were we supposed to do? A question on step 2, if you could just maybe...
Yes,
quickly...
and let's see if I can go back, because I think I can get to that screen. Step 2 is actually to identify your deeper, wiser self. I'm going through, bear with me. Notice the second column. Step 2 is to identify your doubting self. So really all I'm suggesting is to recognize that doubting self, the doubt, the self-doubt, all the doubting self does is agree with the inner critic. Says, yep, I know you're right. I'm worthless, or I will never get it right, or I am too fat. I'm too skinny. All of those things. Hopefully that clarifies for you. I'm just going to, Brother Tingy, do you let me know if I'm going too fast?
Just wanted to know what to do with step 2. There was a question that came through. So
here's what you do with step 2, right here. As you write down, yep, yes, agreed. Whatever statement you would use as an agreeable, you're right. Okay.
Right.
Hopefully that makes sense. And really it's just to reinforce that the deeper, wiser, or no, the doubting self has no power, is submitting, is giving up, disowning those needs. Okay. So now I want us, let me review. Step 3 is to evict your inner critic and your doubting self. So I want to go to step 4. Let me just pull up that slide. Now, I actually want to stop share because I want to pull you back and just talk to you for a minute about step 4. Now, this is important. I don't want you looking at a visual. I want you to be embracing some of what I'd like to share with you right now. For those of you who took the poll, 100% of you reported sometimes feeling like you are not needed, struggling to feel needed or valued. I was struck by that statistic because this didn't surprise me, but I was struck by 100%. Often people tell me it's similar to feeling invisible. Feeling unneeded or undervalued is such a painful and discouraging feeling, which often feeds into loneliness and despair. The critic feeds into that. This step 4 in conquering your inner critic will directly touch that pain and loneliness and hopefully generate a new view of yourself and possibly unlock inspiration as to how to address that painful struggle. So let's talk for a minute about what sources you can rely on. Sometimes people tell me their critic is so strong that they struggle to find characteristics of their deeper, wiser self. So let me suggest one source that we tend to forget about, a source that I consider to be one of the most reliable sources, a divine source, our patriarchal blessing. And President Thomas S. Monson, spoke about this specifically. And I love this quote, and I can't wait to share it with you. I want you to think about it. Think about your blessing and what he's saying to you and me. Quote, a patriarchal blessing is a revelation to the recipient, even a white line down the middle of the road to protect, to inspire, and motivate activity and righteousness. A patriarchal blessing literally contains chapters from your book of eternal possibilities, unquote. Now, I already can hear you. So many times I'll hear someone say, but it's not very specific. That may be true. So I invite you to read it, ponder, set it on your bed, just look at it, listen. But here's something I want to suggest to you. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 talks about, when I read this, I thought, wow, the Lord has a Google view of our world. He sees it so clearly. And President Monson is suggesting that this is a revelation to each of us from God. So let me share with you what Isaiah 55 says. Can you pick it up? The Google view. The Lord said, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. He's suggesting, I see it. I see it so clearly. Let me guide you with your blessing, the white line down the middle of the road. So here's the problem. So often when I ask someone if they've read their patriarchal blessing lately, they say, oh no, it's actually been years. I don't even know where mine is. President Monson continued, quote, "Your blessing is not to be folded neatly and tucked away. It is not to be framed or published. Rather, it is to be read. It is to be loved. It is to be followed. Your patriarchal blessing will see you through the darkest night. It will guide you through life's dangers. Your patriarchal blessing is to you a personal liahona to chart your course and guide your way," unquote. I don't know about you, but I would love to have a liahona, and apparently we have one. Now, I want to remind you, as I talk about the sources of finding your deeper, wiser self, the characteristics and specifics about you, I want you to remember the adversary does not want us to be more aware of who we really are. And the adversary does not want us to have a testimony of our patriarchal blessing. Sometimes I find people struggle with embracing or believing the positive aspects of themselves that they might uncover in their patriarchal blessing or things they hear from others. You might struggle to trust and believe the strengths and gifts that you might identify or uncover. But as you work to identify characteristics of your deeper, wiser self and write them down, you might feel awkward to write them down. You might worry that you'll sound boastful or prideful if you acknowledge them. I'm going to suggest that this is likely due to the fact that your inner critic has become so dominant that it has caused you to discount your true gifts and has become a powerful distraction. Remember, one of Satan's tools? A distraction from seeing yourself accurately, from seeing yourself the way God sees you. Now, recently, I found myself thinking about famous leaders who had faced considerable oppression. Maybe you've thought about this too. But Nelson Mandela came to mind. Now, I know that he was beloved by the people of South Africa. So as I researched his life, I found that he was considered an icon of democracy and social justice. He received more than 250 honors in his lifetime, including the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, as I thought about him, I remembered that he had been imprisoned for almost 3 decades, actually 27 years in prison. I found myself wondering, what was his internal script? What did he tell himself through all those years to sustain himself? In Nelson Mandela's inaugural speech in 1994, I believe he is actually giving us a glimpse into what he must have said to himself daily throughout his years in bondage. I can't wait to share it with you. Quote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Maybe our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, or famous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And when we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others," unquote. Now, to me, this is a man who had an understanding at some level of God's plan. When I read that he said, "You are a child of God," I was filled with this amazing feeling of, wow, Yes, your inner critic wants you to remain small and insignificant and powerless. So it's time to evict that inner critic. Here's some examples of things that you might write under deeper, wiser self. They're broader and more hopeful, with room for expansion, like, I am a kind person, or I love to serve others. I love to bring happiness to others. I'm worthy of love and belonging. I am a loyal friend. Now, here's one to consider. People confuse this one. Maybe you are very sensitive and you pick up on others' emotions quite easily. Maybe you're tearful sometimes. Maybe you thought that was a curse. I believe sensitivity to others' feelings allows you to have deeper empathy and compassion for those who suffer. I like to label that the gift of discernment. Maybe you would write something like, I have the gift of sensitivity. I do recommend all of us write something like, I know I can't do hard things without the Lord's help. Now consider Matthew 11, 28 through 30. This is actually the Savior's beautiful invitation to allow him to be a part of this process. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, to further expand on this exercise, I want you to begin to counter your inner critical voice. And here's the hardest part. It's progressively harder. As you write down those critical thoughts, I want you to try to write down a compassionate evaluation of yourself. In response to a thought like, I'm such an idiot, you might write, I may struggle at times, but I am a hard worker and I can and choose to conquer hard things. Remember, this exercise is not meant to overly inflate you or to boost your ego, but to begin to help you offer yourself a more compassionate attitude. This exercise is meant to unlock your ability to see yourself more accurately. Now, step 5, this is the biggest step, and the one that requires effort and courage and faith. Step 5, do not act on your inner critic voice. Because that voice has become so familiar, you'll be tempted to act on it automatically. But when you hear that voice, here's the formula I want you to use: 3 steps. Stop, evaluate, and ask. Now here's what I mean. Stop. Stop when you notice the thought. You're automatically interrupting a neural pathway in your brain when you do that. Stop, evaluate the message. Ask yourself, does this thought empower my deeper, wiser self, or does this thought make me feel sad, worthless, and hopeless? Now, here's another directive I want to invite you to do. Maybe one of the most important things that I'm going to recommend for you in this step-by-step process: reach out. This is so difficult, this exercise, that you'll be tempted to give credence to the inner critic. But sometimes it's helpful to share this process with a trusted friend or loved one. Let them know that you're embarking on a very difficult journey and that you need their help to remind you of who you really are. Now remember, some angels are on this side of the veil, torchbearers that lead the way when we are weakened. Allow one of your loved ones or friends, trusted friends, to be that torchbearer for you. I invite you also to bring this to the Lord and ask for divine help to once and for all conquer this negative chatter. You cannot do this without the help from the Holy Ghost, who whispers sweet truth. Through this process of identifying, separating from, and acting against this destructive thought process, you will grow stronger while your inner critic grows weaker and eventually slips into silence. Now, I know that we're getting close to the end of my time, so I want to summarize with something I feel is very important to connect all of this information with. I began this presentation with a quote from Elder Holland, suggesting that we're facing a very disturbing war on our self-confidence. Now, in his talk, "Cast not away, therefore, your confidence," he said, quote, "It is the plain and sobering truth that before great moments, certainly before great spiritual moments, there can come adversity, opposition, and darkness." And I'm going to add, this is not him, this is me, an inner critic voice. He continued, "Life has some of these moments for us, and occasionally they come just as we are approaching an important decision or a significant step in our life," unquote. Could it be that your inner critic has picked up intensity because you are approaching a significant step in your life? I want to bear witness, bear my testimony that Jesus is the Christ and he is the Savior of our world. He suffered for you and me, and he took upon himself all the anguish of this life. And I bear witness to you that if we will come unto him and seek for his divine companionship, he will assist us in conquering this painful inner critical voice. Now he said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. And I leave this testimony with you in the sacred name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen." Now, brother and sister Tingy, I would love to open it up for any questions. And one thing I want to point out before we dive in, I have 2 additional diagrams that I want to send to you. I need to figure out how to get them to you because they give you an overview of the cycle of the inner critic and the cycle of the deeper, wiser self. So we need to explore that. I know that this presentation will be available for a year, but we will explore that and find a way to get those to you. So Brother Tingy, Sister Tingy, take over.
Yes, feel free to, if you have specific questions, you can type them in the chat. And thank you for those who've added in comments there and the positive affirmations, the parable of the talents, very nice comments. And it looks like you've got fans of Nelson Mandela online as well. Someone asked, where will the presentations be available?
You know, that's a great question. I'm just told this is being recorded and that through this same interface, they will have it available to stream online. So I'm sad that I can't give you more direction. You are all probably more tech savvy than I am, but they promised that this would be available so you can watch it again.
Great. Thank you. They really like the comments for sharing such a hopeful feeling and great steps.
Good.
Sharing them with their daughters.
Oh,
well, how do you recommend that I help them? I'm trying to help my daughters with these concepts. How do you recommend that I help them?
You know, that's a great question. And one that if it's coming from a parent to a child, a friend to a friend, if you sit with them and you did exactly what I did and say to them, I'm an expert because I have an inner critic too. And you sit with them and you say, let's do this together. Here are the steps. How can I support you? Will you support me? I think that's very appropriate and it gives them hope. And it's this collaborative effort that normalizes the experience. So I hope that gives you some direction as to how to do this. Please don't hesitate. And it can be any relationship. I've used this in consulting with businesses where they really struggle with the inner critical voice regarding their business and their capabilities as a professional. So in any relationship, this works.
There is a question on the reference for the quote from Nelson Mandela. Where could they get that?
You know, if you do a search online, you will find his 1994 inaugural speech, and it will be in different various sources. But this was a direct quote from that speech.
Just a thought here. How long does it take to truly conquer your inner critical voice?
You know, I'm asked that so much. And actually, I suggested earlier that it's a lifelong journey. And it's important to remember to be patient with ourselves, because as in reality, when I suggested you're interrupting a neural pathway, that neural pathway actually hijacks us when that inner critic pops up. And so we have to slow this down, interrupt it by stopping, assessing the message and asking, is this message empowering me or is it destroying me? So our brains are miraculous computers that actually contain software that sometimes must be overwritten or updated. You know how that goes with newer, more accurate facts. Remember that the inner critic voice actually makes us feel sad and robs us of peace. That's a good sign that the source of that thought is not the spirit of truth. So we must continually work throughout our lives on our old belief system and seek the Spirit's help to see ourselves more accurately. And the process will become easier and easier and more rewarding. So for example, when I have a client that comes into my office in initial session, they'll say, how long is this going to take? I always say, depends. This is the beginning of an amazing journey. And every time you practice it, it will become more and more rewarding for you. So again, be patient. I hope that's helpful.
Debbie, there was a request for you to pop up the last two slides so someone could screenshot them, I think.
Yeah, let's see. I will see if I can pull it up. The last two slides must have been step 3 and step 4, maybe. So let me share my screen. I'm glad that those were useful.
And someone was might be aware, they're wondering if Nelson Mandela was also quoting someone possibly, but I think if they look up the inaugural speech, they'll find that out. So
find that out. And actually someone quoted him, and that was and so he may very well been, yes. So if you can quickly find that out.
Yeah, it says this quote was also used in the movie Akilah and the Bee and attributed to Marianne Williams. So I don't know.
Yes, that's true. That is true, actually. Thank you. He was quoting Marianne Williams. Thank you. We got some brilliant people with us today.
Do you have self-doubt and an inner critic that you have to show? Is a question.
Now, I would love clarification. Ask that question again. Do you have an inner critic and self-doubt we have to show?
It says, do you have self-doubt and an inner critic that you have to show?
That's a curious question. I would love clarification as to what they're really wanting to know. An inner critic does show up, obviously, if we're openly downplaying ourselves or saying, oh, I'm not worthy of that, or, oh, you're just kidding, you're not telling me the truth, and I'm not sure if that's maybe what they're suggesting.
Let me see if I get some more clarification, but another question. When you notice a friend beating themselves up and listen to their inner critic, what can you do or say to help them recognize it in the moment?
Great question. Do you remember my scenario that I painted when I said, imagine a friend coming to you and sitting with you. Would you tell them this? So you sit with that friend and you say, ouch. If I came to you, would you tell me that? And you just turn it around so that they get a perspective of those are harsh and attacking and critical thoughts that really surprise you as their friend. It makes you sad that they treat themselves that way. So it's just bringing them to an awareness and actually hand them the handout that I uploaded in the files. Give them the steps, have them examine and become more aware of what their inner critic is telling them. That may be useful instead of trying to get them to do it on the spot. Say, hey, I have something I'd like you to try.
Right. Your comment about the diagrams you would like to share, I don't know if those can be put in the files section as well.
Yeah, I will quickly, yes, if I can gather it. I know that we have 10 minutes after this actual presentation. I will do that. I don't know if this is okay to share, but I'm certainly happy. I am on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me and request.